Hello and welcome to my channel Medicine with Dr. Moran. Based on a recent poll on my channel, my viewers and subscribers voted because they wanted to know more about the waning of immunity with Omicron. While this particular variant, which is so much different than previous variants with over 30 different mutations in the spike protein, fortunately this particular variant has led to less severe infections compared to other variants, approximately 50% compared to Delta. Now, unfortunately, it does have a degree of immune evasion. The transmissibility of this variant is markedly increased, and it's not because of viral load as one recent study showed. It's actually due to immune evasion because of the mutations. So we're definitely dealing with a different virus now than we did at the very beginning of the pandemic. The question is, well, how well protected are vaccinated people and people who have been naturally infected? When it comes to protection from vaccination, we have to remember that the vaccine, of course, was built against the original strain of the virus, the Wuhan or ancestral strain. The vaccines we're giving are 2-year-old vaccines. They have not been changed by any of the manufacturers to provide more specific protection against any of the other variants that we've had so far. While large numbers of vaccines have been given, as you can see on this slide, only 9% of people in low-income countries, as of the third week in January, have actually received 1 dose. Now, it's always sad to hear about doses expiring in well-to-do countries that have had these vaccines, and that these doses are not being sent to low-income countries. We can get our internet shopping done within 24 hours from ordering to receiving that package at your doorstep. But there's no process for the low-income countries to order and get their vaccines delivered from the wealthy countries. This kind of global vaccine inequity continues to run rampant, where people in some countries, of course, have now had 4 vaccinations. Yet people at high risk in other countries haven't even got their first one. Even 1 dose for people at risk in low-income countries would make a significant difference. This is why some wealthy countries such as Canada and the UK, when vaccine supplies were quite limited, opted to try to vaccinate as many people as they could with the first injection before going ahead and vaccinating a second time. Vaccine inequity is obviously an issue because the virus is going to continue to mutate until the pandemic is under better control. We saw this in India, of course, with the development of Delta. And we saw this in southern Africa with the development of Omicron. The virus has mutated significantly since then, as I mentioned, but despite this, there's still significant protection against serious disease so far. I've mentioned this in previous videos, that it's due to the fact that when you're naturally infected or vaccinated, your body typically matures its antibody response, and it actually generates antibodies that are more broad in nature and not specific to what it's seen. Your body is trying to generate antibodies to predict future virus mutations. In addition, the T cells that we all have, which are our main defense against serious infection, they still recognize the vast majority of epitopes, or what we call regions, of the spike protein. There are about 100 epitopes on the spike protein, and just because 30 are different, your body still recognizes the other 70 if you've been vaccinated. With natural immunity, it's been shown that your T cells will recognize, of course, other parts of the virus, because you see the whole virus, and you will have developed antibodies against other parts of the virus. The vaccinated people obviously don't. That's one test we can use clinically to tell people who have been vaccinated whether they've had previous infection, if they have antibodies against parts of the nuclear or envelope antigens that the virus actually has. If you do get Omicron, this study from China demonstrated that breakthrough infection rapidly produces potent cross-reactive, broad neutralizing antibodies against different variants, including alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and Omicron. The antibodies went up markedly around day 9 through 12, and there are also cross-reactive spike and nucleocapsid T cell responses to the variants of concern I just mentioned. So with that background, what is the protection now against Omicron? Well, when you look at hospitalization data, the vaccine effectiveness of 2 doses, particularly when you get beyond 6 months of that second dose, it drops significantly. This has been seen in 3 recent studies. This table, which was put together by Dr. Eric Topol, summarizes the data. One of the studies was from the UK, another was from Southern California, and the third was CDC data that they put together. You can see that protection against hospitalization when you get beyond 4 to 6 months drops to 44, 68, and 57% respectively in the studies. If your last vaccine dose was earlier than this, you still have good protection close to 90%. Now, if you get a third dose and get boosted, those numbers will go up to 90%. Now, the studies don't look at natural immunity. The waning tends to be more noticeable in people who are older. This graph from the CDC demonstrates their data comparing vaccine effectiveness against hospitalization with Delta and comparing it to Omicron. So this data confirms, particularly in the elderly, that the third vaccination is clinically helpful. In addition, none of the 3 studies looked at different age groups, which is relevant because the immune system of a healthy person under 50 is obviously going to be different than somebody over 60 with comorbidities. They're just not the same person. So the numbers in the table that I've just shown you is an average for all people across all age groups, which obviously doesn't tell the whole story. It's a lot like the infection fatality rates of this virus, which overall are 0.25%. That means 0.25% of people die who get the infection, but healthy people under 50 have a much lower rate than that, and those over 80 have a much, much higher rate, on the order of 5%, in fact, for that age group over 80. So I think that there's no question that a third dose is important, especially in people over 65, the immunocompromised, and likely in people over 50 with comorbidities. Now, the benefit of healthy people under 50 getting a booster, for example, is not known and may not be present or be very marginal. In general, of course, even before vaccine, healthy people under 50 are at low risk of severe disease to begin with. So that even when they've been vaccinated twice, what's the benefit of that third shot? Well, it's not to prevent severe disease, but to prevent mild disease and reduce transmission, so that in countries with limited resources, the hospitals would not be overwhelmed. Further data will be available in terms of age groups, I hope, in the coming weeks. This discussion is part of the nuance of this pandemic. Remember that we're learning about this illness and vaccines as we go, and many of our vaccines that we have decades of experience for, the vaccines that you would have received in childhood, we already knew how many injections we needed and the timing to get the optimal effect, and we don't know that in this instance. Now, data from Israel using the 4th dose of the coronavirus vaccine does provide antibody spike, but this spike is a much less than what it was on the 2nd or 3rd dose. So we have the law of diminishing returns. The antibodies to Omicron only last about 3 or 4 months. Antibodies, of course, reduce your risk of mild infection, but only for a short time, whereas the memory B cells and T cells are much more long-lived, and they're the ones that protect against severe illness and death. The issue here is, what is our goal with respect to the vaccine? If it's to protect against mild infection, then you need frequent boosters with diminishing antibody levels, which is obviously not practical. In medicine, we've never given vaccines to prevent mild disease. If the goal is to prevent severe disease, we need to look at how the vaccine works in different populations of age in particular, not just overall. Unfortunately, in these studies, people who have recovered from COVID-19 were not assessed. This is unfortunate, as a significant percentage of the population has been infected, and once again they're forgotten. Remember that those people who were unfortunate enough to get infected and to go through the illness, an illness that may have given them significant symptoms or even long COVID, or had them end up in the hospital or the ICU, or unfortunately even dying, they're not getting the kind of data that they deserve. People in this situation want to know what their risks are, and we as physicians want to tell them. Some do not want to get vaccinated, while we know that a single vaccination after COVID will improve immune response to a degree, as I've said in many of my natural immunity videos. We want to know, well, how much, and is it clinically relevant? As a physician, I want to be able to give numbers, statistics, of the likelihood of someone getting really sick, needing to go to the ER, getting admitted, going to the ICU, or even dying. In North America, there's not been acknowledgement of natural immunity. You're either vaccinated or you're not. As a physician, I see it very differently. You may too. To me, you either have a level of immunity, whether it be from vaccination or previous infection, or you don't have immunity. That's why many countries have immunity passports and allow people who have recovered the same benefits as those who are vaccinated. Many countries have travel requirements that if you're not vaccinated, you can't come into their country. With the Omicron wave, many people have gotten infected but have not been able to get tested to confirm their infection, even though they've had typical symptoms and had significant exposure. Clinically, these people, we would say that they almost certainly had COVID-19. Now, these people can obviously not prove their immunity, even if a country allowed recovered people to enter. With respect to Omicron, we don't know whether this is going to be the end of this pandemic in wealthy countries. We obviously hope that we're getting towards the end of this. It would be foolish, I think, to predict that, although some are saying that at this point. There's no question, due to the increased transmissibility, there's going to be more immunity in the population, but whether that's sustained is another question. It's likely we're going to get other variants. In order to beat out Omicron, they're going to have to be more transmissible. Hopefully they'll be less virulent or less severe, as virulent means. Hopefully the immunity derived from vaccination and natural infection will thus prevent hospitalization and severe disease going forward, as we're going to be encountering these variants. I want to make it clear I'm not fear-mongering. I'm simply mentioning that this is probably what's going to happen. This is why I think that better vaccines are likely to be needed. The US Army, for example, is developing a pan-coronavirus vaccine, and there are oral and nasal vaccines that help block mucosal transmission. When you have vaccines that have good mucosal immunity, what happens there is we get sterilizing immunity. And this is what most people think of when we think of the word immune. If you're immune to something, you think, well, sure, I might be exposed to the virus, but when it gets in my nose or mouth, I have antibodies that are going to destroy it. I won't get sick, and I won't give it to somebody else. That's what sterilizing immunity is about, and that's hopefully what we might see with some of these vaccines going forward, if we don't have any other good solutions, or if variants continue to be significant enough that people are ending up in the hospital and dying. Now, therapeutics is important. This is something I think that's gone under the radar. We don't talk about therapeutics very often, but this is something that we do have now. I made a recent video on what kind of outpatient or at-home therapeutics we have. So if you get COVID, contacting your family physician is important, particularly if you're at high risk. There are some medications that we can give. In addition, of course, it's important to make lifestyle modifications to improve your health, to elevate it and minimize those comorbidities that you might have. I have congratulated a few of my patients over the last year or two who've made significant strides to improve their health. But unfortunately, many more of my patients have seen a decline in their health in different ways. This pandemic has really highlighted, I think, to a lot of people the danger of comorbidities. And it doesn't just pertain to this particular viral infection. It pertains to any kind of health problem that you might develop in the future. The better health you're in, the better you'll be able to tackle any of those future health problems. Lastly, I have an announcement to make. Starting this week, I'm going to try to devote more time and streamline how I make my videos. I will be providing more videos succinctly, much quicker, in order to provide the most accurate, up-to-date COVID developments. If you like my channel and this is what you're interested in, please subscribe. Feel free to share with your family and friends. Most of the videos on my channel are actually about COVID, primarily because I started my channel shortly after the beginning of the pandemic. Feel free to search my channel. There's a number of medical videos that are there, as well as some of the procedures that I do. You may find those helpful. I appreciate you staying until the end and watching me on Medicine with Dr. Moran. Get healthy and stay healthy.